Hi everyone, Neko here with another recap. Tsukasa wakes up her husband Nasa with a kiss and good morning that causes him to almost pass out. Nasa and Tsukasa are newlyweds, who became married after Nasa searched for Tsukasa for many years after she saved him from a speeding truck. Today, while Tsukasa watches Nasa focus on his work, she wonders how he can concentrate while she is playing video games next to him. After Nasa keeps working, Tsukasa challenges herself to distract Nasa and she tries to distract him using a quiz show on TV. Though when Tsukasa asks him questions from the quiz show that involves complicated math, she finds that Nasa can easily answer the question correctly and stay focused on working. To Tsukasa's annoyance, he can easily explain how he came up with the answer as well. Suddenly, Ai arrives announcing she will join them to win peaches from them. Charlotte also arrives to contribute noodles and join the game. Although all the girls concentrate hard on the quiz show, they find that Nasa is still easily able to come up with the answer. The girls determine if they don't distract Nasa, he will easily win their quiz game. So Charlotte and Aya decide to provide Tsukasa with a maid uniform to distract Nasa. Although an embarrassed Tsukasa refuses at first, Aya dramatically begs her to help them and Tsukasa reluctantly agrees. They return to Nasa, who is struck with how cute Tsukasa is with her maid uniform, but even then he still manages to win the quiz game. Later that night, Nasa can't stop thinking about Tsukasa in her maid uniform and wonders if he has developed an attraction for maids as he secretly wishes her to wear the uniform again. Tsukasa watches him and correctly determines that he would like her to wear the cosplay again, so although she is embarrassed, she agrees to get another uniform from Charlotte. The next morning, Kaname, who has heard about Nasa and Tsukasa's misadventures, asks Nasa what kind of cosplay he would like his wife to wear. Kaname teases his interests while interrogating him with her sister Aya, and Nasa confesses that he has a preference for scientist cosplay. Later, Kaname asks Nasa if he and Tsukasa have done any couple activities together because they are newlyweds, but Nasa confesses since this is his first relationship he doesn't have much experience. Aya arrives to preach about school uniform dates, but since Nasa never went to high school he doesn't understand her argument. He also wonders if the cool Tsukasa would be willing to wear a schoolgirl uniform. Kaname challenges him to get Tsukasa to wear a school uniform, suggesting that it would be like a rare gacha event to see her wear one. Aya decides to help and she confronts Tsukasa directly to ask if she'd try a school uniform. Although Tsukasa refuses at first, Aya tricks Tsukasa's competitive side and successfully challenges her to wear the uniform. Tsukasa appears in a school uniform in front of Nasa and the sisters, and while the girls fawn over Tsukasa and try different poses with her, Nasa is struck with awe. He then compliments her and Aya convinces them to go on a date at the local park together. Later that night, Nasa is working but he again can't concentrate as he keeps thinking of Tsukasa in the school uniform. Tsukasa dryly comments that this seems to be a common occurrence nowadays to his embarrassment. Although they are a bit flustered to discover this side of each other, Tsukasa is starting to find dressing up fun, which also makes Nasa very excited. Soon Tsukasa returns with the school uniform to Nasa's amazement, and after she tries out various poses they get into a romantic moment where Nasa takes off one of her socks and they end up kissing. That night Nasa has another dream of Tsukasa in cosplay when she wakes him up. But after he asks her to wear the uniform again, Tsukasa refuses out of embarrassment. One morning Nasa is thinking about first meeting Tsukasa after he was almost hit by a truck, when she surprises him with a good morning kiss. They're both of them separate embarrassed because they're still unused to the newlywed life. Later that day, while Nasa is working, he notices that Tsukasa is annoyed after watching a movie about flying sharks. She goes on a minor rant about the bad plot of the movie and complains that he hasn't been paying much attention to her. Nasa decides that they could spend time together at a luxury movie theater as a treat, so he plans an outing for the two of them to the nearby theater. Since they don't go to the movies often, Tsukasa is entranced by the film, and Nasa watches as she goes through many emotions throughout the movie. After they return to the bathhouse, Kaname compliments Nasa on the date as she's noticed Tsukasa has been acting very happy, but she also wonders when Nasa and Tsukasa will hold a wedding. Nasa confesses that he never thought about wedding plans, and Kaname scolds him because if she was a bride she would want an extravagant wedding. She also teases Nasa that by holding a wedding, he can see Tsukasa in a wedding dress. That night at dinner, Nasa asks Tsukasa if she would like to hold a wedding ceremony, but Tsukasa adamantly refuses. She complains about the large crowds, the spectacle of a wedding, and brides always wearing large dresses. Nasa expresses his wish to see Tsukasa in a wedding dress and says they could hold a wedding the next week. But Tsukasa recognizes that Nasa has no idea how much work goes into weddings after she acts out planning a wedding with Nasa. Kaname overhears their preparation and is shocked by Nasa's ignorance. She also brings watermelon for them to eat, and the two girls decide that Nasa is completely over his head if he wants to plan a wedding. After Nasa guesses that a wedding could cost 150,000 yen, or $1,000, Kaname shows him that a cheap wedding would actually cost him almost 7 million yen, or $50,000. Nasa is shocked by the amount and wonders if people cry at weddings because they are so expensive. Meanwhile, Chitase is practicing her boxing with her maids Charlotte and Aurora. Chitase wonders if Nasa and Tsukasa will be holding a wedding, and she takes out her frustration with the issue on Charlotte. After an intense workout, Chitase confesses that although she would be annoyed if Tsukasa was wed, she would be happy if her grandmother Tokako could attend to see Tsukasa. Back at the spa, Nasa is still shocked over the costly price of the wedding after finding out there are extra hidden costs as well. He finds Aya playing video games in the living room, and she tells him about engagement gifts that are used to help offset the costs of weddings. To his shock, she also tells him that weddings are often planned almost a year in advance as couples have to get put on waiting lists for the best wedding venues. Tsukasa arrives and also points out that weddings are a huge logistical headache as well, because the larger the invite list, the more schedules need to be determined in case friends and family need to travel to the wedding location. She also states that planning the food for a wedding is also a huge problem and decides that the effort cannot be worth it. Aya complains after seeing them start to give up and announces that she will help them. She decides they should buy a wedding magazine to get advice on how to plan a wedding, and she sends the couple to pick up the magazine at the grocery store. Nasa and Tsukasa find the wedding magazine and Nasa is shocked with how large it is. That evening they go to the park to read the magazine together and enjoy snacks. Tsukasa tells him that she is happy with their peaceful newlywed life currently, and is satisfied with their dates together, and that maybe in the future they can have a ceremony together when the timing is right. That night, Nasa still confesses he'd love to see her in a wedding dress, and they hold a small fake wedding ceremony between themselves before going to bed. Tsukasa is watching a TV show about math when Nasa corrects the mistakes they make on the show. She wonders if her husband used to cause trouble at his school, and Nasa remembers that he used to be close to his former middle school homeroom teacher Naoko Yanagi. The life of a middle school teacher is tough, and Naoko is still teaching kids at the school. One evening, Nasa runs into her at a convenience store. They discuss the fact that Nasa had a car accident that made him drop out of high school. But when Naoko notices Nasa has a wedding ring, she becomes shocked to find out he is married and worries that he married some troublemaker. After insisting to meet his wife, Naoko follows him to meet Tsukasa and is pleasantly surprised with how normal Tsukasa is. After they properly introduce themselves, Nasa gets flustered because of the situation. Although Naoko tentatively approves of Tsukasa, she wants to keep an eye on the girl because she is close to Nasa. Naoko stays for dinner and is impressed with Tsukasa's cooking skills, especially since the teacher only eats convenience store food. Naoko notices that the couple are very close throughout the meal, and she becomes less worried about Nasa's future. She asks if Nasa would like to go to college eventually, but although Nasa is certain he can get into a good university, he just wants to enjoy the present and spend time with Tsukasa. Naoko leaves thinking about Nasa's words about enjoying the moment, and this gives her the confidence to ask her fellow teacher Taniguchi out on a date. The next day, Kaname and Tsukasa are working at the bathhouse when a scary man appears at the bathhouse. He announces he is looking for Nasa, and although Kaname is intimidated, Tsukasa demands he leave if he isn't going to use the bathhouse. After confronting the man and calling him an idiot, she gives him an ultimatum, and the man intensely buys one entrance ticket into the bathhouse. After their confrontation, Nasa arrives calling the man Jinga, who is happy to see him. Jinga calls Nasa his big brother, and he is a close cousin to Nasa. Surprised to hear that Nasa is married now, Jinga passes out, and he later apologizes for his intense behavior. Nasa also corrects their misconception of Jinga, saying that his cousin is actually a star high school student and his school's student council president. Jinga talks about all the advice that Nasa has given him, and the girls realize that Jinga talks like he is in the mafia, when he actually lives a normal high school life. An embarrassed Jinga asks if Nasa is truly married, as he fears the best for his cousin, and he demands that Tsukasa and Nasa kiss to prove they are married and in love. Nasa and Tsukasa start to kiss to Kaname's amazement, but Jinga stops them as he is convinced that Tsukasa really cares for his cousin. Jinga then tells them why he has arrived, that one of the boys in his crew has found a stray cat. The whole crew has spent a lot of time trying to track down the cat's owner, and they'd like Nasa to help the crew find the cat a home. Nasa agrees and sends everyone to the vet to get the kitten checked. While the vet is examining the cat, Nasa and Tsukasa notice how angry the cat is, and Tsukasa comes up with the name Toast for the cat due to the color of its fur. While they wait, they wonder what they should do with Toast in case they can't find the owner, or someone to adopt the cat. Nasa talks to Jinga and agrees to temporarily take care of Toast if Jinga and his high school friends can help get pet supplies like good litter and good quality pet food. Tsukasa is surprised that Nasa seems knowledgeable about cats, but Nasa tells her that good pet owners must always be responsible. Later they find that Toast is friendly with Tsukasa, but not with Nasa. And that night, Toast wakes up Nasa while he is sleeping to get food from him, before promptly falling asleep on Tsukasa. The next morning the two of them play with the cat together, when Tsukasa asks Nasa if she or the cat is cuter. They almost kiss, until they notice Kaname watching from the door. After she leaves, they once again try to kiss until Toast stares at them. Later, as thanks for taking care of the Toast situation, and as a late wedding present, Jinga gives Nasa 2 tickets to the amusement park. Nasa invites Tsukasa to join him on a date, and they excitedly plan to go the next day. But unfortunately it is raining when they arrive, so they have to stick to indoor activities. Tsukasa is happy to be at the park anyway, and they buy cute raincoats for the date. Meanwhile, Chitase is at the amusement park as well alongside her maids, and the 3 of them plan to follow the couple. But before they start their plan, they decide to go on a roller coaster first. At the same time, Nasa and Tsukasa go to a haunted mansion together, and are amazed by the high production value of the ride. Tsukasa is enjoying herself immensely, so they decide to go to a space-themed ride based on a popular spaceship series. After the ride, the two of them meet Naoko, who reveals that she is at the park with a coworker of hers. Naoko isn't dating her coworker Taniguchi, but as Naoko talks about all of Taniguchi's efforts to invite her to activities, Tsukasa realizes that Naoko doesn't understand that Taniguchi wants to date her. She quickly takes Nasa away so the teachers can be alone, and tells Nasa that they need to give Taniguchi and Naoko some distance so their date can be romantic. But Nasa wonders if his teacher, who is normally oblivious, will notice that her coworker is interested in her. Later at the park they watch Taniguchi and Naoko from afar, and it is very obvious that Taniguchi is interested in Naoko. But although they cheer for the male teacher, they notice that he is too shy. Tsukasa calls Naoko as dense as Nasa, and she hopes for the best for the couple. Meanwhile, the teachers are on a boat ride together when Naoko reaches Taniguchi. Happy that things might work out, Nasa and Tsukasa leave to go do something else. Meanwhile, Chitase and her maids are having fun and have completely forgotten about Tsukasa and Nasa. Later, Taniguchi is in line with Naoko, and he tries to confess his feelings to her, but his efforts are constantly blocked by other conversations nearby between couples. The teachers then walk by a wedding at the park, and after watching the bride and groom, Taniguchi wonders if he can try to confess again. He invites the teacher to lunch further in the park. Meanwhile, Nasa and Tsukasa are also headed to lunch when Chitase and her maids catch them flirting in the park. Chitase continues to spy on them as she watches them from afar. Chitase demands her maid disguise themselves, so the 3 of them put on masks so they can get closer to the couple. After judging Nasa on his buffet choices, the 3 of them watch Tsukasa and Nasa have a romantic lunch date. Later they follow the couple to a gift shop where Tsukasa has fun interacting with the theme park mascot. An embarrassed Chitase also decides to play with the park mascot. Light soon falls on the park, and although Taniguchi wasn't able to confess to her, Naoko thanks him for inviting her to the park and they watch the fireworks together. Inspired by the day's events, Taniguchi begins to confess when Naoko asks him to marry her suddenly. The both of them then confess to each other and hold hands. Meanwhile, Tsukasa and Nasa are enjoying the fireworks together, and Chitase with mixed emotions decides to leave with her maids after watching the happy couple. One day Tsukasa is watching Nasa work when Kaname arrives asking for their help. Kaname's vacuum cleaner is broken, and since Nasa has experience fixing the bathhouse's electronics, she asks for his help in fixing the cleaner. After explaining the various parts of the vacuum cleaner in detail, Nasa successfully fixes and shows Kaname how to do maintenance on the cleaner. Suddenly, Aya arrives announcing that she is in terrible trouble at school. Since she has skipped too many days at school and has spent too much time reading magazines, Aya is in danger of failing out of high school in her upcoming exams. She begs Nasa to help tutor her, but Nasa tells her that he dropped out of high school when he was younger. After she insists, Nasa tentatively agrees to help and starts to look over her schoolwork. They discover that Aya has pretty horrible grades, so Nasa decides to come up with worksheets for her to work on as well as a study guide of exam questions. Nasa is certain he can come up with a good guide, as he can predict what questions Aya's teachers might ask. Meanwhile, Nasa begins to teach Aya formally about the history of mathematics while Tsukasa watches from afar. Later that day, Tsukasa finds Nasa working on a project for a friend who is starting a streaming business. Tsukasa is worried that Nasa is overworking himself, and asks him to take a break, and after finding his shoulders very stiff, demands that he lay down so she can give him a massage. Nasa has never had a massage before and becomes easily flustered. After Tsukasa orders him to relax and enjoy the massage, he wonders if at some point he should return the favor. Tsukasa finishes by kissing his hand, and Nasa proposes he learn how to massage as well. Tsukasa is a bit embarrassed that Nasa is interested, but she agrees. But when Nasa starts to massage her, Tsukasa professes that she isn't used to other people touching her. Eventually, the two of them relax together. Later that evening, Nasa is heading to the bath when Kaname asks him how often he and Tsukasa kiss. Kaname is asking because lately she has been obsessed with romance reality television, and she demands to know how Tsukasa and Nasa's love life is going. Kaname then explains the various romantic kisses that happen on television, even showing an embarrassed Nasa a list she has written. That night, Nasa and Tsukasa decide to go on a midnight walk together. Nasa is enjoying himself, but Tsukasa is a bit embarrassed at his good mood. Nasa suddenly asks if he can play with her hair, and she tentatively agrees. Since they are in a park at night, Nasa asks if they can stay at the park for a while, but Tsukasa is a bit embarrassed to be flirty in public. She agrees to stay out longer, but the two of them accidentally run into Naoko and Taniguchi kissing at the park. They go home after hiding in the bushes together to eat some grapes, and Tsukasa tells Nasa that Kaname also gave her a list of kissing locations as well. Inspired by her words, Nasa suddenly kisses Tsukasa on the cheek, leading them to kiss each other in different places, ending with a kiss on Tsukasa's stomach. The next morning, Aya has been studying all night while Kaname reveals she had been spying on the couple at the park, but was bored because they didn't do anything. One day Kaname and Aya's mother returns from overseas to visit the bathhouse. After Kaname dryly points out that she is traveling all the time, her mother complains that their father has run off, so she travels out of grief. Her mother then reveals a pair of tickets to a hot springs resort she won, but Kaname decides to give the tickets to Nasa because she and Aya will be too busy running the bathhouse and studying for exams. She doesn't want the tickets to go to waste and tells Nasa that it would be a good honeymoon for him and Tsukasa. Later Nasa reveals the tickets to Tsukasa and reveals he is a bit embarrassed to go on a private trip with her. Tsukasa also becomes flustered but points out that they might as well go since they are married now. The next morning the couple set off from the bathhouse to go to the hot spring resort, but Tsukasa becomes worried that Chitase might spy and follow them like she did on their last trip. Luckily back in her mansion, Chitase has decided to leave the couple alone for now. Nasa and Tsukasa are on the train to the hot springs when Tsukasa unintentionally reveals she is nervous about using the hot springs. They arrive at the resort and are shocked at how fancy and large their accommodation is, since it even has a private open-air bath. The two of them decide to head to the bath alone first before meeting up later. And while in the bath, Nasa is enjoying the peace and tranquility until he thinks about Tsukasa and is determined to make the trip memorable. Nasa decides to do as much research into the resort as possible so that he can pick out the best activities and the best food for their trip. He decides to leave to scout out good locations for the couple until he runs into an old woman who asks his help navigating the resort. Meanwhile back in town, Aya complains to Kaname about giving up the hot springs tickets because she wanted to relax as well. The Kaname points out that their family literally owns a bathhouse, so Aya can have a relaxing bath anytime she wants. Aya unconsciously starts to clean the bathhouse and then realizes that Kaname has tricked her into working instead of relaxing. Later, Kaname invites Chitase to join the sisters at the bathhouse, and Kaname teases her and her sister. Meanwhile at the hot springs, Tsukasa has trouble relaxing in the bath, so she decides to look for Nasa. Nasa is still helping the old lady find her way around the hot springs, and she compliments his patience. After pointing out his ring, the old woman asks about Nasa's marriage to his embarrassment. The old woman tells Nasa to treasure his marriage and he will understand in time. Suddenly, Tsukasa arrives and grumpily recognizes the old lady as Tokiko, Chitase's grandmother. Tsukasa complains that Tokiko knew Nasa's identity all along and was just trying to play a trick on him. But Tokiko was just enjoying herself and she just wanted to meet Tsukasa's husband for herself. After formally introducing themselves to each other, Tokiko reveals she was looking forward to meeting Nasa, since she had always known Tsukasa to be a bit of an ice queen. Tokiko was also surprised that Nasa could recognize the sacred rock at her house was a moon rock, although Nasa says he just read the plaque when he visited her mansion. Tokiko cryptically wonders if he can accomplish what nobody has been able to do for many years, but she doesn't elaborate what she means. Instead, she hands them a ticket to a tour so that they can fully enjoy the hot springs. Tsukasa begins to lose her patience and demands that Tokiko leave them alone, but becomes embarrassed when Tokiko starts to tease her about her newly married life. Finally, Tokiko decides to leave, but she stops to wish them good luck and asks Nasa to take good care of Tsukasa. Later, the two of them prepare to enjoy the hot spring town together, and Nasa becomes worried that although he wants to ask Tsukasa to join him in the hot springs, he doesn't want his intentions to be misinterpreted, and for her to reject him. Tsukasa then joins him in a fashionable yukata, and the two of them head into town to see the historic sights. Dressed in their traditional outfits, Tsukasa explains the different functions of the hot springs for the town, and as they pass by a gift shop, Nasa wonders if they should buy something for the twin sisters back at home. Nasa then takes a candid picture of Tsukasa while she is eating, and then continues to take pictures as the two of them travel around town together. Later, Nasa asks Tsukasa about Tokiko, and Tsukasa reveals that she has known Tokiko since she was little, but that she finds the old woman much too attached to her. Nasa points out that he found Tokiko very nice, and he buys them beef skewers from a nearby yakitori place. The two of them walk to the riverbed that guides the hot spring water, but while Tsukasa is having fun, Nasa is still worried about asking his wife to join him in the private hot spring bath. Tsukasa notices that Nasa seems a bit nervous, so they head back to the bathhouse together. Nasa reads manga to try to give him confidence, but it doesn't help. The couple then have a fancy dinner together featuring the local cuisine, and Tsukasa is happy to have a little break from cooking. After dinner, the both of them are feeling embarrassed because it is around the time when couples would use the private bath, and Nasa struggles to ask Tsukasa to take a bath with him. Tsukasa hesitantly agrees, but only if Nasa uses the bath first. And that night the two of them enjoy the private bath together, even though they are so flustered they can barely look at each other. Nasa tries to make small talk, but Tsukasa cheers him up with kind words and he confesses his love to her. Since Tsukasa is normally a reserved person, she takes some time to tell him she loves him. The two of them then play in the water for a while. But once it's time to leave the bath, they end up overstaying and overheating themselves. The next morning, Nasa is still embarrassed about the night before, so he goes for a quick bath before joining Tsukasa for a fancy breakfast. Nasa feels like he has learned more about his wife with this trip, and that beneath her seemingly cold exterior she also struggles with feelings like he does. They prepare to leave for home, but on their way out of the resort, Tokiko meets them and teases the young couple. Nasa enjoys talking to the old woman, but Tsukasa professes that she wanted the honeymoon to just involve her and Nasa. The two of them hold hands leaving the resort, and while on the train home, Nasa and Tsukasa talk about the great time they had together and decide they should plan another trip soon. But after they return from their trip, summer has hit full force as the two of them suffer under the hot sun. Even though they use popsicles and fans, they find that the bathhouse is way too hot for everyone. Nasa suggests that the bathhouse invests in an air conditioning system to help the family, but Koname points out that it will take time to install. Nasa insists that he can install the system himself, so he and Tsukasa head to the mall to find one. Tsukasa tries to find the best deal possible, but Nasa quickly orders a model that can be delivered on the same day. Nasa then takes Tsukasa to his friend Nakiri's shop, where he can rent the necessary tools he needs for installing the air conditioner. Tsukasa wonders how Nasa knows Nakiri, and he reveals that he and Nakiri used to be classmates in middle school. Nakiri is also surprised to hear that Nasa is now married, so she decides to give them some tools as a wedding gift. Nakiri asks about how Nasa and Tsukasa met, and is surprised because she didn't consider Nasa a romantic kind of person. Later, the young couple head back to install the air conditioner so they can finally relax during the warm summer. But that night, Tsukasa wakes up when trying to sleep because the contrast of the cold air and the warm blanket gives her trouble. Though when Nasa tries to make the room colder because he is too warm, Tsukasa keeps waking up because she is too cold. Later, after Tsukasa has fallen asleep, Nasa watches as she unconsciously fights with her blanket depending on the temperature. Finally, the both of them manage to fall asleep. The next morning, Tsukasa is working when a young girl starts to rant to her thinking she is Koname. She is shocked to see an old lady like Tsukasa, and wishes to ask her for advice, but the girl becomes vague and won't give her name. Tsukasa tries to get the girl to introduce herself, but the girl just keeps ranting about Twitter, and is confused that Tsukasa won't help her with advice. Koname soon arrives and introduces her as her friend Kyuma, who is a classmate of hers that accidentally forgot to go to school that day. Kyuma had mistakenly believed that the school was still on summer break when Nasa walks in as well. Kyuma is familiar with Nasa and is shocked to hear he is married now as he introduces Tsukasa as his wife. Nasa heads out to return the tools to Nakiri, while Kyuma begins to ask Tsukasa about married life. But when he questions become too intrusive, Tsukasa hands off the girl to Koname. Kyuma announces that she came asking Koname for advice, but she wants to have some ice cream first. She then heads out to buy them all ice cream while the girls look on confused. Meanwhile, Nasa returns the tools to Nakiri, who asks him about his newlywed wife. Nasa shares stories of his time with Tsukasa, and the fact that she likes to buy cookies in cute containers, and Nakiri, who is more of a tomboy, is interested in how girls like Tsukasa act. Nasa confesses he feels happier and more free now that he is married, and after he leaves, Nakiri wonders if she should find a wife as well. One day after Tsukasa asks Nasa if he loves her, she becomes strangely quiet. A panicked Nasa goes to Koname to ask for her advice, thinking he must have made his wife angry in some way. Koname tells him that he might be misinterpreting the situation, and she compares the situation to Nasa ignoring a purring cat. She orders him to be more affectionate with his wife to apologize, but Tsukasa was simply trying out the advice given by a romance article. Later, Nasa starts to do intensive research in understanding wives and the importance of expressing words verbally. He also continues to receive lectures on the subject by Koname. who tells him that affectionate phrases are important to women, like water to flowers. The Nasa struggles on when is the best timing for compliments, and he starts to research the best times to compliment Tsukasa. But when Nasa tries to compliment her while they are watching television, and after they wake up, Tsukasa is simply confused. Nasa starts to believe his compliment game is too weak, so he starts to read romance manga for advice. Tsukasa notices this new development, but she also kind of wants to mess with him, so she places toast on his head. Soon Tsukasa starts a pattern of playing tricks on Nasa to distract him, such as tickling him when he is trying to read. After teasing him for some time, Tsukasa asks why he has been reading so much manga recently, and Nasa is too embarrassed to confess he has been researching romance. Finally, after some pressing, he admits that he had been trying to determine the best way to compliment her, and an embarrassed Tsukasa asks him to show off his research. But once Nasa starts complimenting her, Tsukasa becomes both embarrassed and happy. Later, while Nasa is taking a bath, Kaname wonders why he doesn't share a private bath with Tsukasa. She points out that they had shared a bath before during their hot springs trip, and that Kaname can lock up the bathhouse just for the two of them. Though when Nasa tentatively agrees, Tsukasa complains from the other side of the bathhouse, but doesn't disagree. Kaname eventually leaves them alone, so Nasa and Tsukasa end up sharing a bath together again. Afterwards, they use the sauna together, but Nasa starts to struggle as he has trouble with the heat of the sauna. He tries to show off his manliness by staying in the heat, and discovers that Tsukasa is actually an expert in saunas. They share a moment together but are interrupted when Aya accidentally runs into Jinga using a different sauna. Inside her mansion, Tokiko thinks about her childhood memories, when a young and injured Tokiko met Tsukasa in the aftermath of World War II. Meanwhile, Tsukasa is having trouble fixing their television, so she gets Nasa's help. But after he fixes the problems by just replacing the batteries, she grumpily complains about technology. Nasa is charmed by Tsukasa, who seems confident in many areas but often has trouble with modern devices. Tsukasa often has trouble remembering passwords, and she often gets locked out of her mobile phone and has to ask Nasa to help unlock her devices. Tsukasa also revealed that Tokiko usually solved her technology problems, and that the old lady even knows how to program in Python. Tsukasa becomes grumpy because of her lack of technology ability, and Nasa tries to bribe her with cake to change the subject. Tsukasa would prefer more video games, but she settles for cake instead, and the two of them hug before leaving the bathhouse. Later, Nasa is telling Kaname what happened while Kaname keeps a straight face because she is bored of his constant marriage stories. Suddenly, Naoko appears to share important news with Nasa and Tsukasa. She announces she will be marrying Taniguchi soon, and becomes embarrassed when the young couple accidentally reveal they saw the teachers at the park one night. Naoko asks if Nasa and Tsukasa have any advice about marriage since they are newlyweds. Nasa asks Naoko how she is feeling, and the teacher professes that she is a bit nervous. Naoko is also learning more about Taniguchi and his eccentricities, like his habit of trying out terrible food. Naoko has also picked up on Taniguchi's habit after she tried a terrible dish at a restaurant, and could not stop thinking about it. She becomes worried that she has changed so much that Taniguchi won't marry her, but Nasa and Tsukasa comfort Naoko that Taniguchi loves the teacher like she is, and after feeling encouraged, Naoko leaves them. Afterwards, Nasa and Tsukasa are a bit confused and wonder if they should try eating the terrible dish. Later one day, Nasa discovers that he has been suddenly gaining so much weight because when he and Tsukasa are together they are constantly eating. Nasa can't give up Tsukasa's delicious food, but he is also worried about his weight. And Nasa becomes shocked when Tsukasa can tell that he is gaining weight after they hug. Tsukasa then wonders if she is somehow at fault since he eats a lot of her food, but Nasa insists that they shouldn't change anything. Tsukasa also tells him that she will still find Nasa cute even if he becomes chubby, but Nasa is determined to lose as much weight as possible and start exercising daily. Later, Tsukasa tells Kaname about Nasa's plan, and Kaname reveals that Nasa was kind of a nerd at school who didn't do any physical activity. Nasa arrives to start a 10-kilometer run, but he quickly loses steam due to his lack of fitness. To give him some encouragement, Tsukasa decides to run alongside Nasa, who realizes he is far more out of shape than he thought. When they arrive at a nearby park, Nasa tries to show off to Tsukasa by doing pull-ups, but becomes devastated when he can't even do one pull-up. Tsukasa doesn't mind and rewards him with a nice lunch, but the couple are shocked to see Tokiko also eating with them. Tokiko has come to check up on them and asks if they might be interested in going camping, a new hobby she has picked up after watching camping videos on YouTube. She tells them that they might appreciate some time away from computer screens to enjoy the outdoors, and Nasa agrees after Tokiko invites them to camp with her and her family the following week. Tsukasa reluctantly agrees as well to get Tokiko to leave. But before the old woman leaves, she gives Tsukasa some rice balls, reminding her of the time when Tokiko was a child and was given rice balls from Tsukasa. Nasa dreams of the first time he met Tsukasa, but when he wakes up he feels a strange and uncertain feeling. To clear his mind, he speaks to Tsukasa over breakfast regarding their camping trip. But although NASA is enthusiastic, Tsukasa confesses that she wouldn't be interested if NASA wasn't keen on going. NASA wants to see the natural sky, but Tsukasa points out that there are places in the city to see the sky. Tokiko has given them a flyer for an outdoor home party, and it turns out that Aya has also been watching camping videos on YouTube, so she begs Kaname to ask if the sisters could go as well. Tsukasa reveals that the destination they will be going to is a fancy campground owned by Tokiko. Suddenly Kuma also appears demanding that she go as well, because her father had told her stories of camping. NASA also decides because everyone seems to be going they might as well ask Jinga to come as well. Meanwhile Chitase is hoping to use this opportunity to show Tsukasa that NASA is a bad husband because he doesn't know how to handle the outdoors. Her maids point out that she also doesn't know how to camp, and that all her knowledge comes from survival books. The next morning the whole group discusses how to get to the campground, and they have a choice either to take a car directly, or to do a 4-hour hike to climb the mountain. NASA enthusiastically volunteers the group to hike the mountain, even though Tsukasa is a bit uncertain. And when they start the hike, Aya can barely keep up while Kuma keeps slowing the group by playing around, so they send Tsukasa to keep an eye on her. During the hike, Tsukasa bonds with Kuma over the different flowers and bulbs on the trail, and their uses in medicine. She also saves the city girl from death by pointing out a poisonous mushroom. Since Kuma and Tsukasa have fallen behind, Tsukasa proposes using a shortcut. Meanwhile, NASA and the others take the long road, and eventually everyone meets up again. NASA is surprised with how easily Tsukasa navigates the forest, but Tsukasa points out that human beings invented trains and cars for a reason, so that people wouldn't have to travel like this. Later, NASA takes a quick nap and dreams about Tsukasa again. He wakes up to find just him and Tsukasa, as the others have already gone ahead of the couple. NASA wonders if they can spend some time alone, until Tokiko suddenly appears. Tokiko states she has prepared a tent just for them, and that she'll try to leave them alone on the trip. After she leaves, Tsukasa and NASA go on a walk together when they find the rest of the group relaxing in the river. They decide to leave the group again so they can have a moment to themselves. Later, when they return to camp, they are notified that Kuma has gone missing. The group spread out to look for her with the help of cameras around the campground, but NASA soon finds himself lost. NASA is also exhausted from the day's physical activity, so he passes out on a rock. Back at camp, Kuma has returned, but now Tsukasa is worried that NASA is missing. NASA dreams again, wondering why Tsukasa chose him when Tsukasa wakes him up to return to camp. He asks her what she meant on the day they met, that they could only date if he was willing to marry her. Tsukasa answers that it was a leap of faith, and one of the reasons why she fell in love with him was because of how quickly he trusted her. Back at the camp, the group enjoy a nighttime feast. NASA also realizes that Nakiri is also at the camp, as Kaname hired her to set up a presentation on NASA and Tsukasa. Using pictures of the young couple, Kaname details how NASA and Tsukasa first met after a car accident, and that NASA searched for Tsukasa for many years until they eventually met again and got married. Kaname then reveals that this whole trip was a surprise wedding reception planned by Tokiko and Kaname. Kaname then insists Tsukasa and NASA join her on stage for a few words. Tsukasa is too embarrassed, so NASA starts first by talking about how much he cherishes his wife and thanking everyone for coming to the campground to support them. Nakiri then brings out a cake that they secretly had shipped to the mountain, and after Tokiko puts a veil on Tsukasa, the couple cut the cake together for the rest of the party. Later that night, NASA uses his telescope to point out the various constellations for the group. But unfortunately the rest of the group get bored watching the stars. To cheer them up, Tsukasa brings out fireworks for them to play with. Tsukasa and NASA later have coffee with Kaname and Chitase. Suddenly Tokiko arrives asking if she can speak to NASA alone, and while Tsukasa protests, she hesitantly agrees. Tokiko and NASA walk alone and she asks him about married life. She also wonders if he might be the one to make Tsukasa finally happy, and wishes him good luck before NASA leaves. He suddenly finds himself running and finds Tsukasa looking over Mount Fuji on a nearby cliff. They discuss the lingering question on NASA's mind, and he wonders why people get married. Tsukasa tells him that she believes that people get married because nobody lives forever, and perhaps people get married because they hope that the love they share could live forever, even as they pass away in time. The two of them kiss, promising each other under the moon to try to capture that kind of eternal love. Soon it is time to head back to camp, where a special wedding tent has been prepared for them. They are embarrassed with how fancy the tent is, but are also aware that it isn't very soundproof to the rest of the camp. After they share a moment together, NASA struggles to ask Tsukasa to watch the stars with him through the roof of the tent, and they go to bed together. An elderly Tokiko remembers how she promised to make Tsukasa happy when she was young, but she failed to accomplish her mission. The next morning she visits Nasa, who has woken up early to enjoy the sunrise. They have coffee together and Tokiko wonders why he doesn't share the morning with Tsukasa, but he tells her that he's letting Tsukasa sleep in. Tokiko reveals some fresh bread from a bakery in town that she prepares for the two of them. Suddenly she tells Nasa she needs to tell him something important, but the smell of bread has woken up Tsukasa, who interrupts them. Tsukasa quickly takes some of the bread for herself, and they enjoy the rest of the morning together. Later, Tsukasa and Nasa return back home after taking pictures of the campground, but although Nasa is happy, he wonders what Tokiko wanted to tell him. Suddenly Nasa gets news that their old apartment complex has been rebuilt, and they can move out of the bathhouse soon. But Nasa shares that he is a bit embarrassed if they live together alone again, so he wants to visit the new apartment first. The two arrive at the complex shocked to see how much it has changed. They go back to pack their things, but Kaname interrupts them, offended that the couple want to move out and despairing that the sisters will be lonely again. But Tsukasa comforts Kaname, telling her that she will continue to work at the bathhouse, and Nasa can also use one of their spare rooms as an office. So Kaname and Aya will be able to see Tsukasa and Nasa anytime they want. Kaname agrees, and the couple go out for a walk. At the nearby park, Nasa goes for a hug, but an embarrassed Tsukasa confesses that Nasa is pretty bad at hugs. She then shows him the proper way to hug her. Meanwhile, Tokiko is thinking about when Tsukasa used to live with her. Tsukasa had asked Tokiko to stop living for her sake, and to spend her remaining years on Earth enjoying herself. But Tokiko is still caught up in her promise to Tsukasa many years ago. When she suddenly collapses, the couple get an urgent call to see her, where they find Tokiko recovering in a hospital. Tokiko insists that she is fine and she goes for a walk outside, but Nasa joins her, asking if she is really alright. Tokiko reveals that she has actually been getting weaker for some time, but that he and Tsukasa shouldn't worry about her. Nasa asks what was the important thing Tokiko wanted to tell him back at the campground, and Tokiko reveals that she had an important mission she dedicated her life to. Tokiko then gives him the moon rock and asks him to watch over Tsukasa and keep her happy. Nasa promises Tokiko that he'll always love Tsukasa, and Tokiko tells him a great weight has been lifted from her shoulders. Meanwhile, Tsukasa arrives and Tokiko pushes the young couple together and leaves them so they can have a moment together. And this is all for this video. Make sure to subscribe if you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next one.